Good morning, people. It's time for another daily devotion. Today we're going to be looking at Psalm 15. I'll give you a moment or pause your video so you can go and look. If you're wondering, this is coming from, my reading is generally coming from an NIV. My pastor's pocket Bible that I grabbed out, so I'm not staring at different places on the screen. If you're wondering about the language usage, or if you have an ESV or an NLT or an NASB, we can talk about all those when we come back, and why you should prefer the Bible that you own. So, without further ado, Lord, who may dwell in your sanctuary, who may live on your holy hill? He whose walk is blameless and does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from his heart and has no slander in his tongue, who does his neighbor no wrong and casts no slur on his fellow man, who despises a vile man but honors those who fear the Lord, who keeps his oath even when it hurts, who lends his money without usury and does not accept a bribe against the innocent. He who does these things will never be shaken. So Psalm 15 comes in the midst of all the Psalms of David. Those are generally in the front, again, so helping us all on the Psalm quiz. And Psalm 15 starts with this question: who can dwell in the sanctuary? Who may live on your holy hill? And there's a few things going on here study-wise that we can take and unpack devotionally for just a minute. So literally, this is meaning the holy hill in Jerusalem, the sanctuary, and or entailing the idea of living in the tent of meeting and the tabernacle. So who gets to do that? And there is a strong tradition of only the holy, right? Only the priests get to go in there. And famously, right, you remember from Zechariah with John the Baptist, how he's got a rope tied around his ankle, and they're going to yank him out if he's dead, if he doesn't come out, and we all assume that they're pulling on his foot rope as he's having this vision, and he's kicking and pulling it back. So that's one entailment, and that's the near version of this. The second one is this idea that the holy hill of Jerusalem is God's holy hill, and there's a one-to-one correlation in end times between God's palace, God's throne room on heaven, which includes the temple in heaven, and that hill in Jerusalem. So, again, famously, eschatologically, end times related, we're just going to say that God's going to bring heaven right down on top of earth. And you get those pictures of the temple from heaven descending onto Jerusalem. So, right, whose job is it to build the third temple? Oh, wait, God's. Whose job is it to make Israel and Jerusalem holy? Oh, wait, God's. And so this is pushing on that idea of who's going to get to be in that last end times perfect temple as well. And so it's not just the people who are righteous or the people who are perfect or the people who are holy. And holy here in the Old Testament doesn't mean people who never sin. It means people who are set apart. And so, yes, that can mean those who don't sin, but holy also has that sense of just set apart, devoted to something. So we mean more when we say holy that sometimes than our Old Testament brothers and sisters. Finally, then, the text really for the church today means heaven, right? Who can dwell in God's sanctuary, who may live in the holy hill? And here we mean heaven. What we really should mean here is not heaven from chapters 4 and 5 of Revelation, but the new creation. Right? When we say heaven, mostly we mean the new creation, because God's promised that in your baptism you get resurrection of the body. We confess this all the time. And so we're not talking about who gets to go up to heaven and get angel wings and a harp. We're talking about who gets to live on that holy mountain with Jesus forever in the new creation, in the marriage feast of the Lamb, and have the banquet and be married to Christ symbolically as the church. So that's unpacking verse 1 just a little bit and kind of giving us hopefully a good idea of who we're talking about here and informing the list. So Hebrew poetry is a little different than English poetry because Hebrew poetry doesn't rhyme. Every language does different things in their poetry. And Hebrew frequently does a bunch of things that I won't bore you with, but you'll notice that there's little indents. And so verse 2 has the first line and then the second line, right? And in this case, poetically, the second line is filling in the idea in the positive. So you have a negative, positive, negative, positive, negative, positive, right? And until you get down to 4b, who keeps his oath even when it hurts, and that flips it over, right? And so that's important, and I'll get to that here in a second. Okay, so there's the form. So what do you do with this devotionally? Well, there's a few things. We can devotionally sort through our life and take all those negative things and use them as the second use of the law. Use them as a mirror and say, do I do this? And if it's no, then hooray! Don't worry, don't get puffed up. You have sin elsewhere. It's not. But that there are some things on the list that I hope you don't do, right? Or that you do, right? And so there's the other half. So one of the ways we can do is just read through this and look at law and gospel like you would do it, and apply that law to yourself, and then apply the gospel to yourself as well. And if you are already doing this, if there's one that you don't do, right, in the negative sense, if you get to skate on that mirror, if it shows you something nice, then this is encouragement. Then this is how you keep this. Right? And so this is a roadmap for third use of the law, right? Our guide. How do I do this? How do I keep my walk blameless? Oh, by doing what is righteous. That should go without saying. It should be obvious, but I've learned over my time in the ministry, nothing's obvious, and you do have to be blunt, and you do have to just say it. And so we can do that. That's a pattern that we could do devotionally. And if that's all the further you want to go, then by all means, turn the video off now and spend some time in prayer with your Bible and get through that list. Another thing that you can do is wander through devotionally and look at it as somebody's done all these things to you. And because we live in a sinful world, it's probably true that many of these things have been done to you. You are, in a sense, the victim. And I don't want you to own that for the rest of your spiritual life. That's not going to be healthy. But what we do need to do is walk through and find peace with that. And this can be really powerful for some of us to ask God to help us forgive our neighbor for when they did it. Some of it's going to be really intentional, and you know when that is. And some of it, in the best construction, is going to be clueless, and maybe that makes it worse, that they didn't even know they were doing this. Or maybe that makes it better because you're just surrounded by idiots all the time. Probably somewhere down the middle, right? Don't go too far down that. But if you walk through Psalm 15 devotionally and you're the victim, and you pray it out, pray that God will remove the sting, the hurt, remove the wound, at least insofar as he can, and to bring reconciliation. And this will bring up those feelings, and of course the need to go to your brother or sister and to tell them about it, right? Especially if they're clueless and they didn't even know. Don't do that in person. Get a Zoom meeting, call them on the phone. So then the last way that we can deal with this is to look at it in sort of two kinds of righteousness. And what I mean by that is there's our righteousness, our human righteousness, and then there's God's righteousness. There's human works, and then there's God's works. There's lots of ways to describe this. There's imperfect things we do and perfect things that God does. And for this exercise, what that would look like is praying through this list, looking at the way humans try to do this and come to terms with this, and praying that God would break through and would do it powerfully in his own way. And in doing this, if that sounds weird, you already do this when you pray the Lord's Prayer. When you pray, thy kingdom come, that's what you're doing. What does Luther say? God's kingdom comes all on its own, but here in this petition we pray that it might come amongst us also. So we already do this. But we can look through it and say, this is what human efforts look like to live by righteousness, and maybe specifically target some of our own efforts that are good and right and human, and then pray that God would transform them and would come and do them his own way in power. Not just so that we can see what they look like and then we can go and do them, which would be fine, but also so they can be done, because they would be done to the glory of God, and they would accomplish his purpose. And so that's a different devotional take, to look at our righteousness systems. And again, some of these will work better than others for certain verses, and I won't get bogged down in that, but I just thought we can do all of these different kinds of prayer activities. Or maybe you want to pull this out, I'll flatter myself, pull this same devotion out a few different days in a row, and do the different versions. Not that you have to, but it's an option. Finally, then the last verse, he who does these things will never be shaken. Now, this is Old Testament. Of course, this is works righteousness. You don't have to worry about that. Don't be too Lutheran at the end of this. Just know, right, Jesus did these for you. Therefore, you can enter the conversation. You can enter the temple. You can participate with God, not in your salvation, but definitely in your life and in your sanctification. And you can trust in the person of Christ, who has made you his own, who has redeemed you, who has called you by name, and has allowed you to enter in. So there's bookends. Who gets to come? Oh, at the end, the bookend, we get to come in, and it's Christ all the way through. But in the middle, there's some room for us to do some different things devotionally. So hopefully we have time to explore, and hopefully that was helpful for you as we check a different psalm and have some daily devotional time. That's all for today. If you're a Prince of Peace member, stay tuned. I'm going to try to record church today, and it will be up on Sunday. And I might be back tomorrow with a very sad face because church recording didn't go well. So pray for me in my hour of death, as our Catholic brothers and sisters would say. God's blessings. Have a great day.